Hey Edward, how are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Today we will be talking about how to save costs in AWS and how to run things efficiently and especially cost efficient. Since that's a very big issue once your credits start running out and you actually have to pay for the services that have been launched. Um, Sometimes you have some unpleasant surprises. So let's dig into what the options are and how we, where to look out for and basically how to keep your costs under control.
Yeah, I think mentioning the credits, that's already a good starting point because what happens often is if you're a smaller company, you get into an ALS accelerator, or even bigger enterprises, you do a POC, you get some credits, and then you don't really look at the price, you just launch the services that you need, and then when you look at the ALS bill, everything is zero until it is not zero anymore when you run out of credits. Then you suddenly realize how much you are paying. I mean, you could already check even beforehand, even if you have credits, you can still see how much you're paying. But yeah, it's a bit more difficult, and not everyone looks at it. So then,
But please do.
yeah, please do. So it happens, then the credits run out, and suddenly it's like, oh, I only have one simple app, still have to pay $1,000 to $2,000 per month. What happened there? Uh, and then I think the discussions that I have with our customers and just people that run startups are like, oh, I decided on running Aurora because that's just what ALS recommended when I went to the
Yeah.
ALS
But because it's
RDS.
web scale, no.
And then what happens is yeah, then you have to start paying for it, and suddenly you realize it's not cost efficient.
Nope,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, and then you have to start migrating your data, potentially maybe just back to a normal RDS Postgres, if that's really uh well, if you don't want to be on Aurora. I mean, it depends. If you're a small startup, maybe you don't need Aurora because it's more enterprise level. It's just an example.
Yep,
um
absolutely.
so
It's a
then
good
this,
point.
this kind of happens. Yeah, so that's kind of the first thing, is like when you build your architecture, even though you have credits, check what all these services are costing. Because I also have a discussion of serverless, because a lot of people that are new to AWS pick the serverless options, but the serverless options can be more expensive than picking an instance type. If you look at Elasticsearch, some other, also the Aurora serverless can be much more expensive than just running a small instance. It all depends on your data patterns, and so yeah, then you have to, if it's like a service storing data, those are obviously the ones that are most difficult to migrate, because then you have to migrate the data. Um, so those for sure, that's something to look out for. Um,
Another important thing I think is to not launch too many services at once, being like oh, this solution fits that. Like a good example for that is also Redshift, for example. When people are looking into what what data store to use, like data warehouse, you type it in the documentation and you land on Redshift, for example, and then all of a sudden you have a Redshift running. And but if you're not paying for it, read you're using credits, then it's obviously a very good tool. But once those credits run out, it can be really expensive really quickly. And then you have to look into the options to either migrate it to something else or basically, just deal with the cost and then like reserved instances or savings plan in that thing can come into play to remediate that cost. For example, the savings plan is an interesting one because it's not really bound into what you are running, but more a commitment of a minimum amount of spend that you want to do per hour, and you get a discount for that. Obviously, the discount is less than you really specific use like EC2 instances, and even less than you when you are using EC2 instance types and you reserve them, like the reserved instances themselves. Those discounts are a bit higher because they're not that generic to use, because you really commit onto something really specific. But in the majority, I think savings plans are a good option if you want to keep the architecture that you currently have, but want to reduce the cost in the long run, basically.
Yeah, if you don't know yet, like what are your instance types going to be when you go in production, but you're still one year away of really like getting traction, you think, because you're still building an app or something, or you're building even an enterprise app, and you still have a year of work, then you just take the savings plan, because then you get the reduction, and then in 1 year, once you know, okay, these are the instance types that I will use for RDS, for EC2, then you switch to reserved instances, you pick the family, and then you get a bigger reduction. Because the mistake that we see is people not taking any saving plan.
Afraid of the commitment.
No, not even afraid of the commitment. They want to commit, but they don't know what instance family they want to go for. No, so they're like, we might migrate to ARM64, so let's not commit. But you can actually commit as a saving plan on a dollar amount, and then once that commitment is over 1 year later, then you probably know what instance family you're going to go with, and then you take the reserved instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also interesting, I find that when you compare the database services like RDS or other NoSQL databases and DynamoDB. So DynamoDB has an on-demand feature, which is super expensive. And then you have provisioned. So on-demand, you just pay. Provisioned, you kind of say what your read and write is. But when you go into the provisioned, you can also get reserved provisioned. And that lowers the price even more for DynamoDB. So I've seen some really like a DynamoDB table with really high traffic that went from on-demand, like super expensive, to provisioned, which lowered the price already like significantly. And then if you then commit for a year, then you get even a lower price, and then you really have like a database with lots of reads and writes at a very nice price point. So that's also quite interesting. Because it's not only for EC2 and RDS, there's also like Elastic Cache, some other services that you don't know immediately
absolutely,
like just some more exotic services that also have reserved instance plans to reduce your costs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, one thing I actually wanted to say is that because we were talking about different services, when I talk to someone that says I want to reduce costs on AWS, I ask, are you a startup or a small company, or are you enterprise? Because you can really say within AWS you have the startup services, like the services that most small companies and startups will use, and you have the enterprise services. Redshift as a startup, maybe once you have traction and you want to scale and you want to make more data analytics, but Redshift is really like a more expensive service, so you need a lot of funding already to just be able to pay for that once you have some data in there. So as a startup, you need to really go and find the least expensive services. Do you want to run Kafka, which is quite expensive, or are you going to maybe use Kinesis, which is just AWS version of streams, which is a lot less expensive? Are you going to use Kubernetes, which gives you a lot of features, but you have like the price of the master, then the instance type pricing, then you have to keep it up to date, otherwise the pricing bumps to a higher tier? Or are you going to use ECS? Or are you going to use AppRunner? Because AppRunner is also a very valid alternative just for the beginning, just to run as a first service. You see, so you can kind of say, if you're a startup and you want to not spend too much money, you want to be in those services. If you're an enterprise, you can use those services, but they are more expensive. Because then what actually happens is then you run out of credits, or you just like, you don't have traction, and you say, oh, I have to pay this amount to AWS, to Amazon every month, and I don't even have any customer on it. And that price you want to keep as low as possible. And because otherwise it's just money wasted. And then also something that we see, because we have been talking about EC2 and RDS, but load balancers. If you have like 5 load balancers,
it all adds up.
It all adds up in these load balancers and NAT gateways. Yeah. It's like, okay, you have 3 different environments, and then NAT gateways. Okay, let's have them high availability. Okay, 6 NAT gateways.
Yep, those things are not cheap.
Exactly, wasted costs. So especially maybe you don't need them, or maybe you don't need them, or you can just use something that has a public IP address that needs to access something external. So there's definitely, might not be the ideal architecture, but maybe you want to sometimes be in an in-between architecture. Like, you know what the ideal architecture is, and you want to have two NAT gateways, but not now. Maybe once you have traction, once the app gets traction, maybe once the app needs more higher availability, once within an enterprise it gets used more. But at some point in the beginning, when you're developing, you definitely don't need it, because it indeed quickly adds up.
Yeah, absolutely. And also what we also recommend is, for example, we do a lot of well-architected reviews for a lot of clients. Let somebody go over the architecture as well, like, because you're working with it day in, day out. You build that. Maybe you're are not familiar with what can be optimized. So basically, talk to people who are willing to have a look at the architecture as well. And then what we see that there's a lot of right sizing that can be done, for example, where we have a certain base load, or even without the base load, but we're provisioned to handle 2,000 users, for example, but like currently you only have 100, stuff like that. Those things are relatively easy to find once you know where to look. Another interesting development over the last couple of years is the use of ARM64 as well. That's also a good tip, especially for RDS, for example, because it doesn't matter on what the RDS runs. The application doesn't need to be recompiled or whatever. Like, it's just a connection string, and even if it's run on ARM64 or the classic CPU architecture, it doesn't really matter. So, but you get some savings for that as well, because it's more efficient and also faster. There's some speed improvements there as well. So definitely check that out as well.
Yeah, and also if you are a developer and you already have a recent MacBook,
yeah,
you probably are already on ARM64 anyways. So the way you develop your app, it already is tested on ARM64. You can as well just then also deploy on ARM64. So even Lambda supports it, Fargate supports it, everything supports it nowadays, and it's just less expensive. So less expensive for the better performance that you get. So you get every instance gets a bit more performance. So that's why it's actually cheaper, because you don't need to so quickly upgrade to higher instance classes.
And also, a thing that we discussed in one of our previous episodes was also to make sure that you start upgrading to recent versions of like RDS and Kubernetes, for example, because AWS starts charging if you're using an older version.
A lot of people are getting hit with this nowadays, because they only start charging a couple of months ago. So I spoke with different companies. Likewise. And they're like, oh my god, we need to upgrade.
Yeah, where is this cost coming from? Because it's like so subtle on the invoice. All of a sudden, like, it was a specific client that had like an RDS that was outdated, but it was a relatively small RDS, but the cost was like triple the amount to be running an outdated version instead of the instance type itself. So it was quite significant. You could see it in the invoice. Obviously, it wasn't a big instance and it wasn't that super expensive. It didn't bankrupt them or anything like that. But it went from like 150 USD per month to like 450 or something like that. And
for one database.
But it's like, okay, they send emails and stuff like that. But the client was, yeah.
If you forget about this for a year, that's $3,000 gone, right? Yeah. That's just one database. And how many people have like 10, 20 databases? I just imagine like 1 year later, like, oh, we spent $30,000 for nothing. Because often it's just a click of a button, right? It's like, okay, the app can most likely handle an upgrade unless they're doing something really strange in the app. But most likely, you can just upgrade it to an in-scope version.
If it's like multi-AZ, definitely.
Yeah. In the years to come, this is going to be an issue that we're going to see a lot, I think. People are just not updating their RDS or their Kubernetes cluster. Like,
it works.
But whenever you would go to a new client and would log into their AWS account, and they were like, when they came to us and they say we need help, outdated RDS, outdated
all those recommendations,
but they were not taking any action because there was no financial consequences.
No.
But now actually, it will have financial consequences. And just imagine like all these small databases that even you and me are running somewhere that we once tested and then forgot to shut down. It's not like, oh, did I not forget to shut it down? It costs like $20 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Now it will be like, okay, now it costs $20 for let's say 2 years, and then suddenly $100 or whatever price, because then it becomes outdated for nothing because you forgot to shut it down. Like that is completely crazy. And Kubernetes cluster is the same, right? Who doesn't spin up a Kubernetes cluster just to test in a small corporation, in a startup? Like it just happens, and then you forget about it in a region that you just forgot about. Oh yeah, I was logging in US East 1 because that was a default or something. You launch a Kubernetes cluster there, you forget about it. 5 years later, you lost like, I don't know, not because now it's like, I don't know what the price is, but it's not that much, $50 per month or something, or even less, 20, I don't know. But once it goes out of end of life, extended support, yeah, then you want to make sure that you have shut it down.
And obviously on a small invoice, you will see it relatively quickly, but on a big invoice, it will likely go kind of unnoticed unless it becomes really a lot of the money. But yeah, we see that a lot.
I think the scary thing is indeed to only see it 1 year later, 2 years later.
It's just waste. Like you could have already invested that money in upgrading it.
Yeah.
And that's something that people...
yeah, because you know how it happens. You get all these emails, end of life. But you're like, there's no consequences, right? Or up till now. So you're like, well, Amazon will upgrade it automatically or whatever.
Yeah. They will spam me for the next couple of months.
Yeah, so, you don't read these emails anymore.
I will do it. But not now. And and we all know how fast months starts going. Like months fly by easily, and yeah, that's.
So what else? What else do we have here? What else can you do to reduce your AWS cost?
I think we gave some valuable tips already to have an immediate impact, but the majority is also the bulk of the costs are like costs that you avoid of using like the same services for generic type of services, for example, instead of going on a all-you-can-eat buffet when you open the AWS console and just, I need this and this and this and this and this, and add a flavor of Kubernetes on top, and then I need some Redshift, and then in the end it all adds up. If you really are cost aware about the services that you use, do not only read the descriptions on the main page of what magical services that they can provide, but also like the next step. What will it cost actually when I run out of credits?
One app doesn't need 5 different databases.
Exactly.
Often, is like you don't need Postgres and MongoDB
and Elasticcache and Redis and
Elasticcache. Yeah. So
Elasticsearch, I mean, and
Elasticsearch and Elasticcache. Like, yeah, it's like not like I see a lot of engineers and they're like, well, I need my relational database, but I also need my source database, and then I want to have some cache. Like, and then the cache is also, I find the cache so funny, right? Because Redis is a key value store. And if you're just doing cache, you don't need a distributed cache over your 2 or 3 instances of your application often. If you're just caching simple things that can go stale, you can just do it in the app. I'm sure that every language has some library or plugin that can have like a key value store of 100 megabytes. It doesn't often needs to be much. That's just to store some information. You don't need to have it end in an external store. And then that's already how you save some money, because you have your app. Your app already has memory. Do you need another external service? Duplicate that?
And do you need it now already?
Yeah, and do you need it now already? Like maybe start with a local cache first. Okay, it's not distributed over your apps by default. But then maybe at a later stage, you might introduce Redis. But I see often people introducing all this stuff in the beginning, which makes the app expensive from the start.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, we're going to do some machine learning. So let's spin up SageMaker. Let's have a SageMaker endpoint instead of integrating it within your app. Uh, these things they start to add a lot of money, and it's just because it's so easy, right? It's like, okay, you have all these services, you click a little bit. Like the other day, someone was asking me, "Oh, I have this service here that has some machine learning model," and I was like, "Yeah, but I mean, are you willing to pay this price every month instead of just maybe?" He was already developing in Python, like just build your regression model on your laptop, upload it as S3, and then do the inferencing within the app even,
Yeah,
So
true.
it's like, oh yeah, maybe I should look into that. I mean, sometimes it's so simple that you don't need all these services. So yeah, just using a lot of services. I think that's also something that we come across quite a lot, and people say, "Oh, are you there again with this?" Once people start running Kubernetes, their cost explodes. I mean, I see it's just over and over again because it's like, we're going to build an app, simple app. We're going to run Kubernetes. Oh, yeah, but we also need Grafana, something for tracing, Prometheus, obviously.
Yeah.
And then another service, another service, another service, another service. And then, you know what also happens? Then they also use, like, okay, let's say you deploy everything Kubernetes. Okay, but Kubernetes will log its logs to CloudWatch. So you're actually also still using CloudWatch. You have metrics in CloudWatch as well. So you see there are duplicates. And then, oh yeah, and then maybe you also want Datadog. Okay, you have Prometheus but maybe for tracing or APM, you have another vendor and then you integrate with that. And then you can just see that there's a lot of now duplicate capabilities.
It's a snowball, yeah.
And then oh yeah, sometimes then Datadog also, let's say you want synthetic testing in Datadog or something, or some graphs in Datadog. Well, then Datadog goes to AWS. There's nice integration.
Yeah, then query the CloudWatch things, yeah.
Yeah, you pay suddenly like CloudWatch requests go up, cost a lot of money.
The get log requests and the get metric requests, yeah, and it can be quite a lot actually.
And these things are explained in blogs, like over and over again. Oh yeah, just log everything in CloudWatch logs, and then Datadog can pull it from there, and then it's like they're just duplicating capabilities. And this is when things start costing a lot of money, especially because Datadog itself is already super expensive. So it's like, yeah, you already have all these things in AWS, these products, these capabilities like logging, metrics, tracing. Okay, they're not fancy, but either use that or completely something else. But like, there's often an in between where you actually use all of them, and that also gets like quite expensive.
Yeah, that cost is split across all the services, obviously, but like once, especially the put request the get log request in CloudWatch, for example, like this, it's quite a lot for, like you said, just duplicate info, because you can query it in CloudWatch as well. So, but it's not as, like you said, you pay the feed for the convenience, basically. Which
but let's say that you absolutely want to use Datadog, right? Then basically your app should send directly to that. Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's like, okay, you have all these nice integrations, but you will have to just skip everything. You will just have to say then, okay, I'm using AWS to run a Kubernetes cluster. But then why are you using AWS to run a Kubernetes cluster? That I also find funny, right? So if you then let's say you use Prometheus and Grafana and everything, why are you then on AWS? Why don't you use like something else?
Yeah, if you're gonna do it yourself, everything.
Yeah, if you're gonna do everything yourself, just use a less expensive provider. If you're just gonna run Kubernetes and all the services yourself, because then you don't need all these capabilities that AWS has. I find if you're gonna roll everything yourself, there's other cloud providers as well. With less expensive options. But then what I was saying is, okay, once you run Kubernetes, I see the cost explode. Like the setups where the costs don't explode is often you fully integrate with AWS, use every service like the logging, monitoring, use Cloud Runner, like the App Runner, or the ECS. And you don't have to pay any master service like Kubernetes. You don't have to think about instances in multiple availability zones. Everything is abstracted for you in Fargate. And then that's the funny thing is that it actually costs more when you compare it. Like Fargate is more expensive than EC2, but because it's abstracted and because it's more easy to resonate about, to build this setup, you often don't really end up with too many services and then this higher cost. So because then running Prometheus and Grafana, you do also need an EC2 machine to run that, and then maybe does it need to be high available, multi AZ and all these kind of things. So and then you need a database and for all these things, and so.
Which I find tricky because, like, if you put your monitoring not highly available and something is wrong, you're basically like kind of blind. While all those other things from the CloudWatch logs, CloudWatch metrics are HA by design. So in that sense, it makes more sense than because we see it often. Like
I read something on Twitter. Sorry to interrupt you, but I read something on Twitter. Someone was saying, I don't know, I cannot quote it, but I know what the person was saying. I know a lot of people that are in the cloud native space as developers, and they are all getting burned out.
Yeah, it's just a lot to take in. Like
yeah, and then I was thinking, like, yeah, cloud native, it's just a lot, right? All these cloud native technologies. We have been working with Istio, Envoy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's super complex, all this stuff, right? And then you look at AWS where everything's abstracted for you, or Azure, and then I'm like, let's just use that. Okay, less capabilities, great. You don't have to think about this whole scope of all these. Like configuring Istio is like 1,000, 2,000 settings to configure, and then you have like API gateway or something similar on a cloud provider. You don't have all these options, but okay, you don't have all these options. I only have to learn about the 10 options that there are, and I will just use it like that. And then if I need to have something else that is not supported, I will write it in the app or use a library or whatever. So I just think that we are just overcomplicating things in general. I think we need to just go to simplify. Simplify means less costs in the long run, like people need to understand again that operations just need to be cost efficient. We are like, it's a cost center, right? So the less it costs, the better. If you can get to the same, like the same latency, like what are the business goals? Low latency, high availability app. Okay, let's go for that. All the rest is just fancy tools for the people that work in operations. That
means to get to an end, but yeah.
Means to get to an end, but if your logs filter doesn't look fancy because it's not Datadog, well, it's also not that expensive, and at the end you don't pay the price. So I think Datadog is just spoiling basically engineers.
Yeah, absolutely. Price of convenience.
Yeah, you need to say, okay, unless there's a reason, right? Like the reason could be I'm the only cloud engineer, and I am the most expensive person here, so not hiring a second person would actually make sense to run this. But otherwise, yeah. Otherwise, it's just you like say, yeah, like I said earlier, you just indeed pay for a nice front end.
But it's basically what we said in the beginning, like keep it simple and don't launch too many services, and it all ties into that as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm just gonna repeat myself, but it's like when you look at two different apps, and one app is Node.js and has like 10,000 dependencies, and Node.js of 10 gigabytes. I'm exaggerating, right? And the other app is just like, just some core libraries, and that's it, and then it's the same in designing an architecture. Like you have 100 icons on your architecture diagram. There's 100 things to maintain. You have 5 icons. There's only 5 things to maintain and to reason about. Anyways, yeah. So I would say only run Kubernetes when you need to. There's this enterprise versus startup service that we talked about, and then the right sizing you talked about. Keeping everything up to date, and then the last thing that I would mention is have someone, you already said it, have someone look at your architecture. Just have some external opinion.
AWS also provides credits for this if you're on the AWS side of things. Basically, in the well-architected, for example.
Look at we are doing, for example, right? So there's this AWS Loft. Currently, like this thing only exists in EMEA, but US people are also signing up for it.
Yep, and it's gonna migrate at the end of the month as well. But like,
yeah, to a new system. So, but this will still be called AWS Loft, right? So if you are on AWS, you can just get a free call with an architect through your account manager, or if you're a small company, you can just go to the AWS Loft and click on what is it, talk to an expert or something, and then you can have your architecture validated. And I'm sure that on the Microsoft side it's the same. You have an account manager, you just have your architecture validated a few times maybe, because maybe not every single person like will have the same opinion. So you want to have at least a few opinions to see, like what I have, it does it even make sense? But I think it starts making sense, I find, when your cloud costs are not too high.
mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
If you have high cloud costs, like really high compared, like if you say, my app processes transactions, and let's say that the cost to process one transaction is, I'm just saying something, $1. Something is wrong, right? You should really like, and the customers that we have that are very price sensitive, that want to keep the cost down, they have these metrics. They know exactly what the cost is per user on an infrastructure level or a transaction, and they want to make sure that the cost goes down, or not down, or like, that the cost per user goes down the more users you have, because otherwise you're not scaling very well. You're just kind of linearly scaling or something with the cost. So yeah, that's what you want to see. That's like these business metrics of, we have so many users. Does this cost make sense? And when this cost is too high, it just doesn't make sense. You don't want to spend $1 per transaction that you process. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but it's not. Sometimes it's just close.
Yeah, exactly. But you can also project the cost then, like to.
Yeah, but the projecting is quite interesting, because they will say, yeah, but once we are at this point, we will have 50% less. But it often never happens, because indeed, when you have, let's say you have this app with like 10 other services, then all these other 10 services need to be scaled, and then you just kind of scaling it linearly, and like the cost goes up linearly as well. And that's what you don't want to see. And that's actually something that you should really have, like seeing what is the cost per user, what is the cost per transaction or whatever, and then you can actually make decisions based on that, because that's what you want to have. You'll be able to scale, and the cost shouldn't scale with it.
Yep, exactly. Like the cost per user. Yep, makes total sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. Thanks for watching. And
I think that's our like I'm sure there are more ways to save money that we will come up with, but these are like the main items, I would say.
Yeah, this is the biggest bulk, I think, where you can save. Like, we have some practical examples already where people can immediately change their RDS settings to use an ARM64, for example, without any impact. We have some RIs. I think we mentioned most. If you come across something that's interesting, always feel free to put it in the comments as well. The more we learn as well, the better. So, all right. Edward, thanks for your time, and see you next time.
Yeah.
Take
see you
care.
next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.